Warning! On this episode of True Crime Lounge, it will be a bit of a trigger warning, but it's also something that is happening right now in this various time. And while I did try to put my bias aside while talking about this case, I found it very impossible to because of how angry this case makes me. And how she is just getting by, how this case is showing how the justice system is letting a guilty woman who was found not guilty by her jurors for a case that actions that she caused just get away with killing her own child, and that just because she did not want to be a parent anymore. But this is just a warning. I will also be talking about Caylee's law in this episode as well, which I think is something very important, and the fact that we have to have a law shows the lack of common sense that we have in this country right now. But today's episode is going to be talking about the second most hated person in America. Welcome back to the True Crime Lounge podcast. I do have a Patreon that you can join, all of that. And not really going to do my whole usual intro because I really want to jump into today's episode. Yes, I know I haven't done an episode in a while, and I do apologize for that. But I also really want to say something. I recently did a TikTok about Caylee Anthony being voided. And the fact that Casey Anthony has joined TikTok, and the fact that she had like 60,000 followers at one point to start monetizing is messed up. Like, who wants to follow this woman, for crying out loud? She is a monster who killed her own child. Got away with it, and there's nothing we can do about it because it will be double jeopardy at this point. Let me calm down now. Let me try that again. Welcome back to the True Crime Lounge podcast. I do have a Patreon that you can go and join for early access to episodes scheduled to come out. I also have a merch shop for all your true crime gear. For any updates on my channel or podcast, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. With that being said, I really want to jump into today's episode. Now, Casey Anthony, she made headlines by moving to Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Now, I know this because I live in Murfreesboro, and it's all over social media at this point. And I also know she is not with her boyfriend anymore that she moved up here with after she ruined his marriage. Supposedly she moved back to Florida. Now, before you ask, no, I have not seen her at all. My coworker and I have talked extensively about this case, and I even told her the news about Casey Anthony joining TikTok and how everybody is uniting against her. Like, look, I don't voice my opinion on TikTok voice my opinion at all very often, mainly because somebody's going to get their feelings hurt or disagree with me and report me or cancel me or whatever. I don't really care at this point, but today I think this is something we can all agree on. Casey Anthony was a monster who got away with murder and can't be charged or charged again for it because of double jeopardy. Now, I remember, and this case came out in 2008. I remember this case, and I remember my grandparents saying something like, "This is what happens when moms don't care about children." And I'm like, yeah. Now, I also fully believe that the death of Caylee Marie Anthony could have all been avoided if a mom would have grown up and been a parent. Now, this sweet little girl was born August 9th, 2005, to the now infamous Casey Anthony, who was born on March 18th, 1986. She lived in Orlando, Florida with Casey and her grandparents George and Cindy. And on July 15, 2008, Caylee was reported missing by 911, which was not made by her mom. No. By her grandma, Cindy, who said that she had not seen or heard from Caylee in 31 days. The mom didn't even care. Casey was out there living her life. Like, what the hell? Like, how can you not be concerned that your own child has been missing for 31 days? Anyway, now according to Cindy, Casey would give many explanations to Caylee's whereabouts before eventually saying that she had not seen her daughter for weeks. I just want to say that if your child was missing for weeks and you should have called the police right away, not waited like weeks or 31 days for crying out loud. That's just messed up. I'm not gonna say what I want to say because the godly woman in me is trying so hard not to come out right now on this one. This case really irks me. Like, guys, I don't know, like, what else to say. Like, this case is, like, one that makes me so mad. Like, and I'm going to try not to be as biased, but I think my bias is really going to show today on this case. But, Casey would later call the police and falsely tell a dispatcher that Caylee has been kidnapped by a nanny on June 9th. Now, Casey will be charged with first-degree murder in October 2008, and she will plead not guilty. The narcissist in her. Sorry. Gotta calm down for a minute, because this case really does irk me right here. I think this is one case that America can agree on. This is the second most hated woman in America right now. Probably the world, honestly. Like, a child murderer, like, just because you didn't want to be a mom. But on December 11, 2008, Caylee's remains were found with a blanket inside a laundry bag in a wooded area near the Anthony family residence. Investigative reports in the trial testimony varied between duct tape and the duct tape being found near the front of the mouth of her skull. Now, the medical examiner listed Caylee's cause of death as homicide by undetermined means. So, what does this mean? For the state of Florida. Well, they would seek the death penalty in the case against Casey, and relying largely on circumstantial, not eyewitnesses' evidence, and the prosecution will allege that Casey wished to free herself from parental responsibilities and murder her own child by administering chloroform and applying duct tape to the nose and mouth. And Casey's defense team was led by Jose Baez, who focused on challenging the prosecution's evidence, calling much of it fantasy forensics. And the defense stated that Caylee had been drowned in the family swimming pool and that George disposed of the body. On July 5th, 2011, the jury found Casey not guilty on first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, and aggravated manslaughter of a child, but guilty of 4 misdemeanors count of providing false information to law enforcement officer. With credit of time served, Casey will be released July 17, 2001. And the Florida Appellate Court would overturn 2 of the misdemeanor convictions on July 25, 2013. Now, this case did attract a lot of attention from the public, and everyday Time magazine would even describe this as the social media trial of the century. And you thought the O.J. Simpson trial was bad. This one was worse, because television personality Nancy Grace, who also referred to Casey as a tot mom, was notable for attention and corresponding publicity that she gave the case. Now, Casey's acquittal on the murder charges was met with public outrage and with hundreds of thousands posting on social media accounts in response. Like, I'm just gonna say it. The justice system failed in this case. Like, the jury, I believe that the jury and the judge was paid off on this case, honestly. If she had to been sleeping with her attorney, that had to be, like, there is no possible explanation why this woman was found not guilty. She should have been found guilty. She should be serving prison time right now. You don't get away with killing a young girl, a young daughter who was taken far too soon in this world. What the hell? But apparently, if you're Casey Anthony and you live in, like, happy-go-lucky land, then I guess that's fine. I'm gonna calm down now. If I don't, this is gonna be a very long episode. I might have to divide this up into 2 parts. I really might have to. But anyway, on June 16, 2008, Casey departed from her parents' home in Orlando, where she and Caylee resided. Her dad later testified in court that he saw her granddaughter Caylee leave with Casey. And Casey told her mom, Cindy, that she was walking toward taking Caylee toward her nanny, whom Casey identified as Zenata Fernandez Gonzalez, also known as Zanny, the next day. Zanny the Nandy. That's not like, is it not any... Yeah. if y'all are listening to this podcast, and you can't tell by my facial expression, but you can tell by my tone, this case is very, what, like, if there was ever a case that would bug me the most, it's this one and the Madeline McCann case. But anyway, I do plan on talking about the Madeline McCann case later, but let's take today's episode. But Casey had been further informed that Cindy that she was going to be headed to Tampa on a work trip. And 30 days after her departure, her car was found abandoned in Orlando and towed away. George and Cindy were notified that the car had been impounded. When George went to recover the car, he and the tow yard manager noted a strong smell coming from the trunk, which both later stored they believe to be human, decomp. And when the trunk was opened, it contained only a body of trash that Cindy reported Caylee. That day, Cindy reported Caylee missing, telling 911 dispatchers that Casey's car smelled of dead bodies and that she had not seen Caylee in 31 days. Cindy later retracted her statement regarding the car's odor. Let's talk about the investigation now. Casey would tell investigators that she had left Caylee at the apartment of her nanny, and Fernandez Gonzalez and Zanny had kidnapped the toddler. But when police investigated the apartment, that it had been found abandoned by more than 140 days, Casey also told police that she had been working on the Universal Studios. However, when investigators took her to Universal Studios on July 16th and asked her to show them her office, Casey led detectives to a building before admitting that she no longer worked there. And as it turned out, she had not worked there since she had taken maternity leave almost 3 years earlier. Pathological liar right here. And now you want to act like a legal advocate for your daughter that you killed. Anyway, Casey was offered a limited immunity deal in exchange for helping finding Caylee. Prosecutors said that they would not use Casey's statements to police against her. That offer was expired September 2nd, 2008. Casey's parents appeared on NBC's today on October 22nd, 2008, maintaining their belief that Caylee was alive and to be found. Larry Garrison, who was president of Silver Creek Entertainment, acted as the Anthony's family spokesman until November 2008, when he resigned, citing the family's erratic behavior. Now, on August 11th, 12th, and 13th of 2008, the meter reader Roy Crunk called the police about a suspicious object found in the forest's area near the Anthony residence, and in the first instance, he was directed by the sheriff's office to call the tip line now, which he did, receiving no return call in the second instance, and he again also called the sheriff's office, and eventually the two met the police. He also reported that he had not seen what appeared to be a skull near a gray bag. And on this occasion, the officer conducted a short search and stated that he did not see anything. On December 11, 2008, Crunk again called the police, and then they searched in the remains and found the remains of a child in a trash bag. Now, investigators' teams recovered duct tape which was hanging from the hair attached to his skull, and some tissue found on the skull. And over the next 4 days, more bones were found in a wooded area near the spot where the remains initially had been discovered. On December 19, 2008, medical examiner Jan Garvizia, I apologize if I'm butchering that name up, I'm terrible with names, but confirmed that the remains were to be Caylee, and her death was ruled a homicide, and the cause of death was listed as undetermined. Now, what about the criminal action? Well, following her arrest at Universal Studios, Casey was charged with giving false statements to law enforcement, child neglect, and obstruction of a criminal investigation. The judge would deny bond, saying that Casey has shown no disregard of the child's welfare or anything, And on July 22nd, 2008, after a bond hearing, the judge set her bail at $500,000. A month later, Casey was released from the Orange County Jail after the $500,000 bond had been posted by Tony Padilla, the nephew of the California bail bondsman, and Leonard Padilla. Now, Leonard said that he had hope he and his nephew could help Anthony for a missing daughter. However, when the angry crowd began to gather around the Anthony residence, where Casey stayed while on bond, Tony decided to revoke her bond and return her to jail. Good for you, Tony. Good for you. And Leonard further added that Casey had not wanted to communicate with him. However, on September 5th, 2008, Casey was released again on bail, all pending charges after being fitted with an electronic tracking device. Now, her $500,000 bond was posted by her parents, who signed a promissory note for the bond. Now, what about the indictment? Well, on October 14, 2008, Casey was indicted by a grand jury on charges of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter of a child, and the 4 counts of false information on the police. She was later arrested, and Judge John Jordan ordered that she be held without bond. And a week later, the state dropped the child neglect charge because the neglect charges were premised on the theory that Anthony was still alive. Yeah, my face says it all. On October 28, Casey was arraigned and pled not guilty to all charges, and on April 13, 2009, the prosecutors would announce that they plan to seek the death penalty in the case. Let's talk about the trial now. So, the lead prosecutors on the case was the ASA Linda Drain Burdick and ASA's Frank George and Jeff Ashton, who completed the prosecution team, and led counsels for the defense of Jose Barras, who was a Florida criminal defense attorney. You cannot convince me that she was not sleeping with him. She wasn't sleeping with him. If you can convince me she was not sleeping with him, I will be impressed, but I don't believe it. So, along with him, attorneys J. Sheeny Mason, Dorothy Clay Sims, and Ann Farrell served as co-counsel, and during the trial, the attorneys Mark Lippin represented George and Cindy. Now, the jury selection will begin May 9, 2011, at the Pinellas County Criminal Justice Center in Clearwater. Because the case had been so widely reported in the Orlando area, jurors were brought from the county to Orlando. So, the juror selection took longer than expected. It ended on May 20th, with 12 jurors and 5 alternatives being sworn in. And the panel comprised 9 women and 8 men. And the trial took 6 weeks, and during which the trial was sequestered to avoid the influence from information of outside sources in the courtroom. The opening statements will begin on May 24th, 2011 in the Orange County Courthouse, with the judge, Belvin Perry, residing. In the opening statements, the lead prosecutor, Burdick, described the story as Caylee's disappearance day by day. And prosecutors hated that Casey used chloroform to incapacitate Caylee before suffocating her with duct tape, leaving her body in the trunk of a car and disposing it. Now, the defense said that Anthony had likely accidentally drowned in the family pool June 16, 2008, and that George had, with Casey's knowledge, covered up the drowning in order to spare his daughter a potential child neglect charge. Now, the defense also further said that Casey's seemingly unaffected behavior after Caylee's death was attributed to child abuse that she had allegedly suffered at the hands of her brother and her father. Finally, the defense stated that the police investigation had also been compromised by media frenzy. evidence in this case. Well, in the second week of the trial, the prosecution would call various members of the Anthony's family to the stand. George was the first witness, and his response to the questioning was he denied having sexually abused his daughter. Both George and Casey, then boyfriend, testified that they did not smell anything resembling human decomp in Casey's car while visiting while Caylee was missing. But George said that he smelled something similar to human decomp when he picked up the car on July 15th. Now, Cindy testified that to her comment to 911 that Casey's car smelled like someone died and was just a figure of speech, but nothing further than exaggerated claims on the phone in an effort to make the police respond quickly. Now, in the third week was chiefly devoted to forensics analysis, and the prosecution called software designer John Dennis Bradley, who testified that based on the program he recovered of deleted searches, someone using Anthony's computer, he could not specify who, has searched chloroform 84 times. And you're telling me that this somehow did not convince the jury whatsoever? Anyway, after the trial, Bradley publicly reported that the number of errors attributed to the bug in the program, that the computer, in fact, had only contained one search of chloroform. Yeah, I don't believe that. Now, two police dog handlers indicated that the cadaver dogs had detected human decomp in one of Casey's cars. One in Casey's car, and the other one in the family's backyard. Now, the chief medical examiner, Jan Garvazia, for the prosecution, testified that she determined Caylee's manner of death to be homicide on physical and circumstantial evidence, including the fact that her death had not been reported and that the chloroform had been found in Casey's car, noting that the small amounts of chloroform could have resulted in the child's death. In a cross-examination, she admitted a toxicology test on Caylee's bone came up negative for volatile chemicals, and that she maintained her opinion and the death was not an accident, given the lack of report. Now, human indication, laboratory director Michael Warren presented the animation featuring pictures of a still living Caylee with her mom that was improvised where Caylee's decomposed skull and duct tape were found. Now, Warren said it was the opinion that the duct tape had been placed on Caylee's prior to the body's decomp. Now, FBI's latent fingerprints examiner Elizabeth Fontaine said that she had been observed the outline of the heart shape and everything, and Fontaine said that she had not found fingerprints on the tape, though she had not expected to. Now, in FBI analysis, Sebastian Shaw testified that a hair of Casey's trunk belonged to Caylee and displayed to the root banding. Shaw then said that a study he had been running in her expedited at the trial so far and everything. Finally, over defense objections and scientifically reliability, AirPad VAS and the Oak Ridge National Laboratory would report that the air sampling procedure performed in Casey's trunk decomping chloroform. Defense noted that the VAS had been unwilling to share his preparatory database with the forensics technique and everything. Now, the defense began to cut their case. Began their case in the chief in the fourth week, and the forensics pathologist, Dr. Warner Spitz, who had performed the autopsy on Caylee, called her autopsy shoddy, and saying that it was a failure that Caylee's skull was not opened during the examination. Now, Spitz also said that his own autopsy could determine whether or not the child had been placed in homicide. Death was a homicide our opinion of the duct tape and everything. Now, Cindy was now testifying as a defense witness, said that she had not been responsible for the chloroform search on the family computer. No, she had been, my bad. And saying that she had meant to search chlorophyll, but misremembered the term. And Cindy said that records indicating that she had been had work at the time of the search and was incorrect. And she said that they were often because she was a salary employee. And finally, Cindy testified that her family buried pets in the blankets and plastic bags using duct tape and everything. And additionally, the defense would call the FBI forensics document examiner who found no evidence of a sticker residue on there. Now, on June 30th, the defense would call Crystal Holloway, a volunteer in the search for Caylee, who felt that she has stated that she had had an affair with George. And according to Holloway, George said that Caylee's death was an accident that snowballed out of control. And now, during cross-examinations, prosecutors pointed out that Holloway's sworn statement to the police, in which she said that George believed that she knew that, rather than knew, it was an accident. During redirect examination, the defense attorney would ask Holloway if George had told her that Caylee was dead, while publicly stating that she was missing, to which she replied yes. In her earlier testimony, George had denied the affair, and Holloway said that he visited her only because she was in after Holloway's testimony, and Judge Perry told the jurors that it would be used to impeach George's credibility. But it was not proof of how Caylee died, nor evidence of Casey's guilt or innocence. And at the time, both sides had concluded their case in chief. The prosecution had called 59 witnesses, 70 different testimonies, and the defense of 47 witnesses for 63 different testimonies. Casey, did she testify? No, and she had that right to. And here's the thing. I truly believe if Casey would have testified, she would be in prison right now. She would still be in prison. Like, she knew she would be in prison right now. But you have that right to, in the U.S., I know, to testify. If you are on trial, you have a right to testify. But I believe, as I did a case earlier, I believe that the same thing. Her testimony would have made sure she landed herself in jail. I just know it. But let's talk about closing arguments now. The closing arguments were held July 3rd and July 4th. And Ashton, for the prosecution, reiterated the state's belief that Casey had killed Caylee to free herself from parental duties, saying, when you have a child, that becomes your life. And this case is about the clash between that responsibility and the expectation that to go with it, and the life that Casey Anthony wanted to have. He also emphasized that her false claims, and the smell in the air, and the items found in Caylee's remains. Ashton also called the defense's theory that accidental drowning was absurd because he said no one would make an incident look like a murder. I stand by my statement. Casey is guilty. She just has to tell us the truth. Just tell us the truth, Casey. We just want to have a little chat. Turn your comments back on. You know you're guilty. But Boaz, who Judge Perry had said that he could not address the abuse claim given the lack of evidence at the trial, emphasized the circumstantial nature of the prosecution's case, saying that the state's allegations were based on fantasy searches, her forensics phantom stickers, phantom stains, and no real hard evidence. He also said that there was a reasonable hypothesis of innocence in light of the possibility that Anthony had drowned. Further, contending that the drowning was the only explanation that made sense. and a point that was illustrated with a video and everything. And he criticized the prosecution of their heavy use of the character saying the strategy behind this, if you hate her, is you thinking she's lying, a no-good slut, and that you'll start looking at the evidence in a different light. Now, in the defense attorney Mason followed emphasizing the burden of proof that Casey Anthony is not required to present evidence to prove anything, and said that the burdens rest entirely on the colleagues of the state's attorney's office. Now, in the rebuttal, lead prosecutor's verdict said that the case had backed up in the claims in the opening statement with no evidence. She also pointed out that Casey's actions after Caylee's disappearance says responses to grief are varied by as a day is long, but responses to guilt, oh, so predictable. What do guilty people do? They lie, they avoid, they run, they mislead. Not just to the family, but the police, and they divert attention from themselves and everything. This has already been a long episode, but I'm going to take a brief break for a moment. I will come right back, so please take a few moments, pause, and I will be right back, guys. I gotta go get some water and regather my voice. Okay, I am back now. I had to get some water to rehydrate my throat. I am working tonight, so I have to literally... I'm doing this, pre-recording this podcast so I can do my editing and stuff tonight, and hopefully get my Canva working. I don't know what the hell is up with my Canva. If y'all have any suggestions, please let me know. But anyway, let's get back to this case. Let's talk about the verdict and sentence now. So, the jury would deliberate on July 4th, and July 5th, prosecutors say that during deliberations, they were about to give the jury the corrected information with regard to Bradley's software discrepancy. However, the jury reached a verdict before they could do so. And one legal analysis stated that the jury had found Casey guilty before receiving the exculpatory evidence, and the prosecution's failure to fully disclose that it could have been grounds for a mistrial. You still can't convince me they weren't paid. Anyway. On July 5th, 2011, the jury found Casey not guilty on counts of 1 to 3 regarding first-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter of a child, aggravated child abuse, while finding her guilty on counts 4 through 7 of providing false information to law enforcement, and the guilty counts pertain to Casey. And the guilty counts pertain to Casey's false information that she worked at Universal Studios, employed Fernandez Gonzalez as a nanny, had 2 Universal Studio co-workers that Anthony had disappeared, and has spoken by phone with Anthony, and Anthony's went missing. Now, on July 7, 2011, sentencing arguments would be heard, and the defense was asked for the sentencing to be based on 1 count of lying on the grounds that the offense occurred as part of a single interview, as well as the same matter. In the disappearance of her daughter, and the alternative, the defense argued that the concurrent sentencing, that is, Casey is to be permitted to serve various sentences at the same time, and the judge had agreed that to both arguments. Perry felt that the statements constitute 4 distinct separate lies, and he sentenced Casey to consecutively 1 year in the county jail and $1,000 in fine for each of his 4 counts, providing false information to law enforcement, and the maximum penalty prescribed by law. Because Casey had been incarcerated since October 2008, she had received more than 1,000 days in time served credit, and she was released just days after her sitting on July 17th. Now, subsequently, pursuant is the little known Florida statute requiring that judges to assess the investigative and prosecution costs if requested by a state's agency. And Perry ruled that Caylee must pay $217,000 to the state of Florida. And the prosecution had requested $516,000 in reimbursement, but Perry only found Caylee liable in the expense that incurred during the period in which was reported missing, to which the homicide probe opened. And in an earlier argument, Mason had called the prosecutor's attempts to exact the largest sum of sour grapes because the prosecutions lost his case. Somebody was paid off. I'm telling you, somebody was paid off. You can't convince me otherwise. But let's talk about her now deciding to make an appeal. Now, you do have that right to appeal. That is your legal right. I'm not saying it's not. But you're guilty. We know you're guilty. And Caylee appealed in her convictions and arguing that the false statements that she provided officers constituted the offense. And now that the statements were inadmissible because she had not been given a Miranda warning. And the prosecution said that each statement constituted a separate offense and that Caylee was not detained at the time she made the statements. And the appellate court rejected Caylee's Miranda argument, but it concluded that her false statements could only constitute two offenses because they have been made in two interviews. And everything. And throwing out the offenses on double jeopardy grounds. Now let's talk about the media coverage on this case. Now this is one of those cases where it was not just a trial by law, but it was also a trial by the media in the public. Like, we most know, this is the most hated man in America. Well, this was the most hated man in America. He is still number one in my opinion. Casey Anthony, you will always be number two. But the case that attracted more significant media attention was the trial that was compared to O.J. Simpson's murder trial, but it was more widespread coverage in the initial shock of a not guilty verdict. And the New York Times Post even described the trial as going from being a noteworthy case to one of the biggest ratings draws in recent history, and the magazine dubbed it the social media trial of the century. Now, the Anthony case was regularly the main topic of many television talks and everything. But they hosted, including those hosted by Greta Von Strausen, Nancy Grace, Drawdaughter Rivero, and it also featured America's Most Wanted, Dateline, in 2020. And Grace, who also referred to Caylee as a tot mom, had also made her belief belief in Caylee's guilt clear. One is particular credit that almost single-handedly inflated that Anthony, in this case, from a routine local murder into a national obsession. And after the verdict, Grace announced that the case is The Devil is Dancing. I'm with Grace on this one. I really am. She got away with killing her own child. But somebody's going to argue, well, no, she was found not guilty by a jury of her jury of her peers. She killed her child. She killed her daughter. There was a special place in hell for that. If you agree with her, something is wrong with you. If you agree she is innocent, I have to question your logic. I really hold my opinion back on a lot of stuff, but this case irks me so bad that I don't think bias is one of those things I can't control on this case today. But after the verdict, Grace announced to the audience that this is The Devil in Dancing, and Grace's coverage drove the HL into the best ratings months, and as the audience rose more than 150%, on the day of the verdict, it was the most watched hour in history. And after the verdict, Mason criticized talking heads to indulge in the media assassination during the timeline and everything. Now, his response was viewed as especially critical of Grace. However, about Mason's comments, Grace said, "If for some chance Cheney Mason is referring to me, no, I really don't care what her personal feelings are to the top mom's defense. Now, what about the reaction? Because this case had to draw some sort of reaction. I'm surprised, yeah. But her attorney's reaction was the verdict saying, "While we're happy for Casey, there are no winners in this case. Our system of justice has not been dishonored. Memory of false conviction." As the state's attorney Lawson Lamar said that the prosecution case was very difficult to prove, adding that the delay in recovering Caylee's remains worked into our considerable disadvantage. And Lamar said that the state had put in absolute every piece of evidence that existed. And on July 6, 2011, he gave his first interview about the case. And obviously it's not the outcome we wanted, but from the perspective of what we do, that was a fantastic case. Now, initially, the 12 jurors that did not want to discuss the verdict with the media, Perry announced at sentencing on July 7th that he would withhold the juror's name for several months because of the concerns that some people would like to get something out about them. Now, he released the juror's name October 25th, 2011. Only an alternate juror, Russell Heckler, stepped forward the day of, saying the prosecution didn't provide the evidence that was there for any of the charges from first-degree murder and the second-degree manslaughter. It just wasn't there. The next day, juror number 3, Jennifer Ford, gave an interview emphasizing that the jury was not required to find Casey innocent, but to find her not guilty, saying that if you cannot prove what crime was, you cannot determine the punishment. Also, in more interviews, they were saying a feeling of disgust would come over the wrongfully in the signature and everything else. Now, what happened to the Anthony family after this whole case? You're probably wondering, right? I know I am. But I know it just for some reason. But anyway, Mark Lippman, the attorney for the Georgia Symphony, told ABC News that the family received death threats after a not guilty verdict was rendered. In response to the verdict of the statement that said, while the family may not have known what happened to Caylee, they have closure in this chapter of their life. They will now begin a long process of rebuilding their lives. I don't see how you can move on from something like that. I really don't. But, okay. What about the public response? Because there was a lot of it. Well, when the public received the not guilty verdict, many in the crowd of 500 outside the courthouse reacted in anger, chanting their disapproval was wavering protest signs, and many took to Facebook and Twitter as well. Now, according to legal commentary, John Cloud would say the jury made the right call because the state of Florida did not make a good case in that Anthony had murdered her daughter. Now, what about the aftermath? Well, Casey would leave Florida for an undisclosed location not long after the verdict. However, on August 12th, she was ordered to return to serve a year's supervised probation for an unrelated check fraud conviction. And Casey would return August 25th and serve out her probation in an undisclosed location due to numerous threats against her life. Now, in August 2011, George and Cindy issued a statement that Casey would not want to be living in their home when she returned to Florida according to her probation. According to the HuffPost, she would reportedly be working with her probation officer to take an online college class in this field. Now, in August 2011, the Florida DCFS released report based on a 3-year investigation to a disappearance. And the spokesperson says the conclusion that DCF that Caylee failed to protect her child. And in March 2017, Caylee gave an interview to Associated Press, saying that she understood people's feel about and as the daughter's death. And she also goes on to say, as I stand here today, I can't tell you one way or another that the last time I saw my daughter, I believe she was alive, she was going to be okay, and that what was told to me. Now, there's been some civil actions that has been brought up. In September 2008, Fernandez Gonzalez sued Caylee for defamation, and in July 2011, the TES, a nonprofit which assisted in the search for Caylee, sued Caylee for fraud and unjust enrichment and everything. Now, the TES and Caylee will settle in court and everything. Now, I want to end this episode because I really want to talk about something real quick. That's Caylee's Law. And what exactly is Caylee's Law? Well, since the end of the trial, various movements have arisen for the creation of a new law called Caylee's Law. And this would impose a stricter requirement for parents to notify law enforcement of the death or disappearance of a child. One such petition had gained 1.3 million electronic signatures. In response of other petitions, lawmakers in the states of Florida, Texas, Oklahoma, and West Virginia have drafted versions of Caylee's Law. And the law in Oklahoma will require a child's parent or guardian to notify a police of a missing child within 24 hours, and would also stipulate that the time frame of the notification be in disappearance of under the age of 12. Now, the state of Florida would make a law and a felony if a parent or legal guardian fails to report a child in an untimely manner. And this calls for a mandatory reporting law that has been criticized, reactive, overly indiscriminating, and even counterproductive. One critic noted that the law could lead to an overcompliance of false reports by parents wearing of becoming suspects, and additionally innocent people get in the law and searching for children immediately. But, yeah. Now, I talked about Caylee's Law, but I also want to add something real quick. I am not a follower of Casey Anthony on TikTok. I refuse to be a follower of her on TikTok. You can't just, in my eyes, do something like that and then expect the public to get on board with you on that whole scenario right there. In my eyes, that's just unforgivable. There's a special place for you. She was an innocent little girl whose life was taken way too soon. She had her whole life ahead of her. She should have been driving by now. She should have been in college by now. She should be with her boyfriend or whoever right now. This is her life that she was taken stripped from way too soon. And I'm gonna say this: rest in peace, Caylee. I'm sorry that the justice system failed you in this situation. And hashtag justice for Caylee Anthony. Caylee Marie Anthony. Remember that name. Casey, I hope you're happy with the life you've chosen for yourself, and I hope you learn how to quit playing the victim in the situation that you created for yourself, because that innocent little girl right there, because you didn't want to be a parent. You could have put that child in foster care, adoption, like you were originally going to do, but no, you didn't. But yeah, I just want to say that. Justice for Caylee Marie Anthony. Hashtag.